Good morning, everyone. I'm Elliot Gerson, Executive Vice President of the Aspen Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the Stevens Initiative Forum on Virtual Exchange. We're looking forward to a very fruitful day discussing how technology can be used to equip young people, eventually all over the world, to develop the skills they need to enter the workplace that we have today and that we will have in the future. For those of you who haven't been here before, I apologize for the pillar in the middle of the room. It's among the reasons that next time you come here, and we hope it will be often, we'll be in a new building without pillars in the middle of the room, and actually one that will even better be able to take advantage of changing technology, which is changing everything we do here at the Institute, just as I'm sure it is changing things in your own lives as well. The Aspen Institute is very proud to be the managing partner of the Stevens Initiative, which is an international effort to really grow, inspire, and expand the field of virtual exchange. And what it is a lasting tribute to Ambassador J. Christopher Stevens, public servant of the very highest order imaginable from all those who had a chance to know him in his career, who dedicated himself to building understanding among people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different belief systems. And it really is we think, a living and growing and vibrant memorial to the values that he demonstrated in everything that he did. I'd like to acknowledge, in particular, in that context, Dr. Ann Stevens, Ambassador Stevens' sister, who's sitting in the front row with her husband, the U.S. Department of State, the Bezos Family Foundation, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Morocco, several private sector partners, including Twitter and Video, and the education organization LRNG. We're pleased to have representatives of these and many other organizations with us today, and we thank them very, very much for their generous support. As I think most all of you know, the Aspen Institute is a nonpartisan organization that convenes leaders of the world, leaders of nations, leaders of communities, leaders of companies and organizations, to bring them together to discuss, address, and actually do something about critical issues. We have more than 30 policy programs that run the gamut across domestic policy, education, poverty, energy, environment, and the like, and also foreign policy. The Stevens Initiative in particular benefits from a collaboration with a number of our policy programs that are focused also very much on the development of what we call 21st century skills, skills that are essential for young people to enter an increasingly competitive and increasingly global workforce. Also, the Aspen Planning and Evaluation program is very involved, because one of the critical problems that we face, or challenges, I don't think it's a problem because I think the efficacy of this is unquestionable, but one of the critical challenges we face, particularly with our funders and with our desire to have even more funding, is to demonstrate just how effective virtual exchange is. I'd also like to note the Economic Opportunities Program, which is one of our longest standing programs here at the Aspen Institute, which is focused directly on addressing the unfortunately widening gap that exists among people around the world and within countries in terms of their economic attainments. So we invite you over the course of our program to explore these programs and connect with our colleagues. For us, the need for this initiative could not possibly be more urgent. More and more jobs require collaboration with colleagues or clients, literally thousands of miles away on the other side of the world. And so many of the issues that affect our lives on a daily basis are affected by events or trends in other countries. And that's now just become so obvious to everyone. I mean, one can't look at the front page of any paper in the world today without seeing just how interconnected we are and how much social and political trends in one country are mirrored in other countries. The vast majority of young people, though, are still hardly getting the opportunity to engage firsthand with international counterparts and global issues as part of their education. And we are focused really foursquare on making that different, making it part of every young person's educational experience to share ideas and perspectives with young people like themselves somewhere else in the world. Virtual exchange, which is online education that allows young people around the world to build those skills and learning by working together, has the potential to greatly expand access to international exchange. We are not by any means trying to say that in-person exchange isn't critical. It is critical, and indeed, I just had breakfast with some remarkable young people from all over the world, and the very fact that they're in this room and they're traveling here and now they're going on to California is extraordinary, invaluable, and irreplaceable. That is obvious. But how many people can do that? How many young people are ever going to have those kinds of opportunities? But they can have that opportunity with technology that improves literally every day. I witnessed the impact of this myself, not just in our own conference rooms here in Washington, but on trips to the Middle East and to North Africa. And I will never forget a trip that I took to Morocco, where 16-year-old Salma Boonsir told me, after participating in a Stevens Initiative pilot with students, as I recall, from, I think, Chicago, how she experienced something, as she put it, new and something really huge. And it was clear that that experience had an extraordinary effect on her global outlook, and on her career, and I think it will continue to have an effect throughout her life. So let me just enunciate what I see, what we see, because it's a team here, and you'll get to know this entire team, as our 6 overarching goals. First, our goal is to increase the reach of the field so that more young people participate in virtual exchange programs. Second, it's to expand access in communities lacking that have traditionally not been able to participate in international exchange. Third, it's to increase the demand for virtual exchange among educational institutions in the United States and initially and critically in the Middle East and North Africa. Those are the regions where our efforts are focused to date. We also think it's important to establish ownership. That is, participating communities have to have a voice in the program design, and that program outcomes directly address their needs. This is not about developing programs that people in Washington think will be useful for people in Tunisia. It's about programs that are going to be developed collaboratively and very much focused on the local needs of people in those countries, in those communities, in those schools. That's the only way it can succeed, and that's very much at the heart of our design of this. Fifth, we have to make virtual exchange more affordable and to reduce the barriers of access. It is shocking how many schools still don't have broadband access, even in the United States. And when you consider the challenge in other countries, it becomes formidable. But the opportunity, once that is there, is extraordinary. And our final goal is to enhance the quality of the programs by building a body of evidence about which that demonstrates the effectiveness of this. It's not enough that we just can express our profound sense from direct observation, impression, and anecdote that this makes a difference in young people's lives. We have to be able to demonstrate that empirically and rigorously, and we're working very closely with scholars who are doing that. because we need to convince not just schools and governments, but obviously we need to convince more funders, and not just those who have initially shown such great confidence in what we are trying to do. So what progress have we made over the past year since we brought people together for the first time? We conducted our first grant competition, and we made grants to 10 organizations in the United States in our first round. Together, these non-governmental organizations and educational institutions will have worked with international partners to reach over 20,000 young people in 29 U.S. states and 17 countries in the MENA region. And we're thrilled to have representatives of these organizations with us here today, and we look forward very much to having them share success stories and lessons learned from the program. And we're going to learn things that don't work, too. I mean, we have to be very open, understand where there have been problems, and where there are problems, identify them and fix them. But I'm delighted to say from my own impressions from the work that's been done so far is that the vast majority of these programs in almost all aspects have achieved extraordinary impact already. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, I just met with a traveling delegation from the National Democratic Institute. These outstanding young leaders from across the United States, the Middle East, North Africa, and South America are visiting Washington and Silicon Valley to explore how they can use technology to build more effective civil societies. And you'll hear from them yourselves later this morning. In parallel to the work of our grant recipients, we've been working with partners at the Research Triangle Institute International on an evaluation of the initiative and the programs we support. Over the past year, we've worked with them to better define the metrics that we use to measure success and established an evaluation working group that meets regularly to advance goals in this area. We're fortunate to have them today with us to share findings from their first annual report. Some of them, I understand, flew here on their way back from 2 weeks conducting site visits in Morocco, so we look forward to hearing more directly from them, very fresh from that experience. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll be announcing a new cohort of grant recipients, and we'll be embarking on research projects to strengthen our understanding of what makes programs as effective as they possibly can be. We'll shortly also be rolling out a new website that will offer a platform for people to learn all about the great work that's been done the last few years, and that platform will be using videos. I mean, it'd be terrible if the platform didn't use advanced technology, because that's what we're trying to do in our programs today. So we'll be using videos and stories to tell how virtual exchange can really transform and inspire young people. And there's nothing more effective than storytelling to pass along these kinds of messages. The next year, we'll also see an increase in our support for the broader community of virtual exchange practitioners, as well as support for educators who want to bring virtual exchange to their own classrooms. We'll work with our partners to bring our message to the cities, towns, and rural areas, and we've just seen in many, many ways, in elections and otherwise, and not just in the United States, but really throughout the world, a gap between attitudes and opportunities in urban areas and rural areas. And I think it's incredibly important to look at the potential that exists to use virtual exchange to close those perception gaps and very critical opportunity gaps as well. Now I want to introduce the new leader of this program. I think as many people in this room know, we said farewell last month to Melissa Ingber, who served the Institute in several critical capacities over 8 years, and including most critically and with the greatest excitement on her part possible, the inaugural executive director of the Stevens Initiative since we launched the program. She built the initiative into the formidable operation that it is today. And while we're very sad to see Melissa go, although she's never really going too far away and will remain connected to us, we know that she's continuing to do incredibly important work in the technology field in her new role at Amazon Web Services. But we couldn't be more pleased that Mohammed Abdelkader started as the executive director just a couple of weeks ago and certainly hit the ground running. Mohammed comes to us from the Department of Education, where he was Deputy Assistant Secretary for International and Foreign Language Education in the Office of Post-Secondary Education. In that role, he was responsible for encouraging and promoting the study of foreign languages and the study of cultures other than one's own at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels in the United States. He led the division's work in administering grants for overseas studies and research programs funded through the Fulbright-Hays Act, as well as Title VI grants to support language and area studies programs in the United States. Before joining the Department of Education, he served as Director of Development for the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University, and he managed the university's advancement activities and strategies in the Middle East. Mohammed brings the skills, experience, and passion, and also a personal life story to this work that we think can't be beat. And we need these skills to continue to grow the initiative and the entire field of virtual exchange. So it's now my great pleasure to turn the floor over to Mohammed to invite him to say a few words of introduction before we go any further. Mohammed?
Good morning, everybody. Good, a few Arabic speakers. Elliot, thank you for the kind introduction. I appreciate it. It's wonderful to be here at the Aspen Institute. It's great to look out and see so many familiar faces and old friends from the Department of Education and State, and our new friends from Bezos and Dr. Stevens and her husband. I've really had such a wonderful and warm introduction, and the last few weeks here have been great. But it feels like I'm drinking out of a fire hose. But I think on that note, I also just want to say thank you to my team. So Mason, Dana, Henry, Andy, Christine, where's everybody on my team? They have been working so incredibly hard the last 2 weeks since I started to get this forum together. And I'm very much in debt for the hard work that they put in. So I just want to give them a quick round of applause and say thank you. Good. So I'm going to keep my comments very brief. We're a few minutes behind schedule, and I want to get the panel started. But again, I just want to share a little bit about my personal story. I know some of you guys here in the room, my family came to the United States in the mid-'70s. My parents came to do their masters and their PhDs from Egypt. And I was born in New York City and raised a little bit in upstate New York. And a lot of my childhood was spent going back and forth between Egypt. During the summers, we'd go visit family. And during my time overseas playing soccer with my cousins out in the street or out in the alleyway, you know, they'd often ask me if I'd met Michael Jackson. I sort of say that jokingly, but that's not really a joke. They would ask me if I'd met, Sylvester Stallone, if my dad drove a red Ferrari, and he didn't. He was, at the time, a PhD student, so that wasn't in the budget. But it was odd because when I came back home in upstate New York, and then later in South Carolina, I got some pretty interesting questions about what life was like overseas. And very quickly, I had to learn a lot about the things that I didn't know, and it made me continue to inquire about other cultures and learn about the language so I could get the answers that I needed. And at a very, very early age, I became very aware of sometimes the gaps between us, but also the intersections. And later on, sort of post 9/11, when things got heated, as I lived in South Carolina, it wasn't necessarily an environment where a lot of my peers had been abroad, but I very quickly learned and really felt like I had an obligation to connect my peers. I made a deliberate decision not to go into the national security world for my career. I really made a deliberate decision to go into international education. That if I really wanted to change the world, as most 21, 22-year-olds do, the way to affect the system was really through international education, and that informed a lot of my decisions. So fast forward to today, Elliot talked a lot about the skills that are necessary for our students to succeed. It's not just about having a degree in finance or a degree in engineering, but so much of the work that we do is in a global context. And if students don't have these skills, then they're simply just not going to have what they need to succeed. So for me, I'm driven by a couple things, and when this opportunity came up at the Stevens Initiative, I was really driven by two things. One is my love for the Middle East and really making sure that students in the United States and the Middle East are able to connect and build relationships. That was sort of one of the things that made this very attractive. But two, my time at the Department of Education, one of the things that was most eye-opening was to see so many students in this country, so many students who just did not have access to a quality education because of the zip code that they lived in. And that's just not okay. But one of the really, really cool things that I got to do was to learn about the Stevens Initiative through Melissa Engber. Melissa pulled me on board a couple of years back when the initiative launched. As I began to learn about it, I really saw the power of this little piece of glass and the little chips in here that students from some pretty rough neighborhoods around the United States were suddenly exposed to people who maybe didn't look like them, but they were able to pick up all these skills, and they were able to communicate across borders, and they were able to code together, they were able to problem solve, they were able to learn languages, and it was transformational for these kids, and for me, that was pretty cool. So when this opportunity came up, I wanted to jump on it. So I'm gonna leave my comments at that for the day. I really look forward to getting to know a lot of you guys, but I'll say a couple things. We're in an ecosystem here, and I said this while I was at Ed, and I will say this now, that virtual doesn't operate on its own in a silo. We've got to work with the language learning community. They've got to work with us. I see my friend Bill Rivers is in the back. We've got to work with the area studies folks to bring them on board. The folks in the business community have to be a part of this. This is a public-private partnership, so I'm glad to see we've got some folks from government here in the room. We've got some folks from our foundation partners. Twitter is here, video is here. We have to continue to think creatively about how to pull people into this tent. Again, this is an ecosystem, and one, unfortunately, in the education space where resources are tight. And frankly, I think it's one of the things that makes virtual so exciting, is we can reach so many more students. So that being said, I'm really excited to be here. I look forward to working with you guys. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you guys are on Twitter, our handle is Stevens, INIT, for Stevens Initiative, so that's our handle. The hashtag for the day is virtual exchange, so we hope you'll use it. I want to see this trending. Not that I don't want you paying attention to the panels. We've got some exciting panels, but I hope you'll participate. To our grantees who are in the room, I'm excited to meet you. I'm excited to learn more about the work that you're doing. We hope that you'll rely on us. We're certainly going to be relying on you going forward. We want to continue to empower you, and we hope that we can serve as a resource and open the necessary doors that you need. We want to see you guys be successful. So that being said, thank you so much. And can I call the panelists for the first panel up? Thank you. Should be already good to go. Michael should be on as well.
Hi. Hi, Lisa.
All righty. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Everybody mic'd up? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Take a second to do that.
Just want to make sure it's not buried in here.
Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Let's go and start right up. I'm going to do a couple of quick introductions. So immediately to my left, we've got Lisa Roberts, who is the project director for the Chicago Sister Cities program. Nice to see you. Next to her, we have Allison Church, who is a project coordinator for SUNY COIL, or the COIL Center, excuse me, which is the Collaborative Online International Learning Center. Did I get that right? Correct. That's pretty good. Not bad. All right. Next to her, we've got Michael Luke, excuse me. Michael is the program coordinator for the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley. I might add, I love to see cross-pollination, and UC Berkeley was one of the Title VI centers. Yes. So, and one of our leading ones, so I was always happy to see that. And then to my right, we've got Ihab Salama. Ihab, how are you? He's doing well. All right, so Ihab's the head of the Middle East and North Africa office for Global Nomads Group. Did I get that right, Ihab? Good. Thumbs up. Great. Well, I want to start off with Lisa. Can you tell us a little bit more about your project and how you've seen students transform over time? I'd love to hear a bit from you.
Yes. thank you for inviting me, first of all, Aspen and everybody. It's great to finally meet so many of you face to face. I am with Chicago Sister Cities International, and we've been doing projects for, or I've been involved doing projects for something like 12 years. Many physical exchanges, many virtual exchanges. And we got involved with the Stevens Initiative partly out of a desire to create a virtual exchange that would reach students at a much more sort of sustained and deeper level. Our program is actually the length of an academic year, which is pretty long for a program. We are creating a STEAM museum, as in science, technology, engineering, art, and math, although we're not doing math. The STEAM Museum is a virtual museum. It will be made up of digital exhibits created by students who have been paired between Chicago and Casablanca. We have four classes in Casablanca, 4 in Chicago, all in very different neighborhoods. And their project, they go through there's a whole curriculum design that takes them through an exhibit development process over the course of the year. We really wanted to create a real challenge, not just another school activity that they have to do, and came up with this idea of, we wanted to bring the digital age into into classrooms that are often very rooted in traditional modes of learning and teaching still, on both sides. And we came up with this idea of asking the students themselves to help us create a new kind of information resource and a new kind of cultural space that we're calling a museum, but we'll see if it ends up being a museum. This is all in process right now. So, and the idea of doing something STEAM-based was very appealing because these are subjects that really cross cultures and languages and practices that cross cultures, and seemed like it would be a very powerful tool for understanding each other and understanding the world. So we were really looking at imparting 3 kinds of very tangible skills, and we're still in the process of measuring all of this, but I can say early anecdotes show that these kinds of impacts are really happening. The 3 being science literacy, digital literacy, and language competence, all in the service of a more qualitative skill, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the idea of science literacy, I hope, goes without saying. We've just had marches for science all over the world. The importance of making students interested in STEAM subjects and knowledgeable about them and comfortable with them and pique their curiosity. So we're really working at kind of the bottom of the scaffold. We're not working with labs, and we're working at that level where you get students, you're kind of assuaging their fears of science. Science education is, I think, very challenging here, both in the United States and in Morocco. So science literacy is very important, a very important skill we're trying to impart. Digital literacy has to do with increasing students' comfort level and skills with different digital media, and that works at a number of different levels. With the technology, obviously, as you said, in Morocco, in the schools we're working with, they're teaching computer science on whiteboards. Which just shocked me when I first saw it. And getting tablets into their hands, getting internet into the schools, opens up literally a whole new world. Working with software, we have 2 different software platforms that we're using that were both created by our partner Digital Youth Network, so a communications platform and then a platform to actually build their exhibits. And then the curriculum, which we are building furiously as we do it and testing it and trialing it, but the activities in the curriculum require those students to use their tools in creative ways, doing research, collecting digital artifacts, collecting images, making photo essays, storyboarding exhibits, writing labels, this kind of thing. And then the language competence really is about practicing strategies for overcoming communication challenges. Our program is English dominant, and I can talk about that at another time because that's kind of an interesting decision that we made. But we're working with an Arabic language class in Chicago, a French language class in Chicago, a science chemistry class, and a civics engagement class, just to kind of see how these different subject matters deal with it differently. The Moroccan students are all English dominant. So, but they draw on these different skills, their different languages, images, which is a kind of vocabulary as well. But all of these are really in support of this larger overarching goal of getting students to meet each other and talk to each other and work together and create an exhibit together. And that's team building, which is its own important skill. How you work on a team across borders and across cultures, and hopefully in the course of working together, really begin to understand and appreciate and empathize with one another and their lives and cultures.
That's great. Allison, I want to turn to you. So when we think about virtual exchange, one of the barriers that sometimes is out there as we think about removing these barriers is getting teachers on board. Capacity is an issue in our schools, whether it's from a technology perspective or a professional development perspective. As I understand it, you all have focused a bit on teacher development at Quill. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, our teacher development it spans, we have an entire professional development program that's been in operation since the inception of COIL. It begins with an orientation, which happens online via Blackboard platform, which seems to be the most effective platform that we've used so far for this kind of exchange. It's done asynchronously, it has synchronous components, and it kind of orients people to the idea, specifically faculty, to the idea of virtual literacy, blended learning, which is something new, intercultural skill building and intercultural communication. We shouldn't assume that faculty have this skill already. It's definitely something that needs to kind of be integrated into their learning and professional development process if they are going to then impart it to their students as well. And of course, from the CCO, the orientation, the COIL course orientation, they go into our partnering platform. They find a partner from one of our MENA partners if they're involved in the Stevens Initiative, but we of course have partners all over the world. We have this massive global partner network. And from there, once they have found a partner, they get enrolled in our academy. This academy spans over 7 weeks. It's very intensive. It has several modules that deal specifically with interdisciplinary work. Some of our teachers are from different academic disciplines. We have a teacher who is teaching physics in Morocco, and we have a teacher who's teaching French in upstate New York. And they have to collaborate and design a course with one another that can both achieve the domains of the program, which is intercultural skill building, and this exchange of culture and language within their own courses and within their own discipline. So we have to kind of coach them through the process and bring out their innovativeness, because there's only so much that we can do. Like Elliot mentioned, they have to take ownership of this kind of thing. And they have to kind of build from their base that they already have significant knowledge of. And from there, within the professional development program, with the MENA specifically and Stevens Initiative, we have a face-to-face component where we take them to a 3 to 4 day workshop in the MENA region, and they meet face-to-face. I was discussing this earlier, and there's only so much that you can do virtually. Unfortunately, to have sustainable relationships, you have to have more than just a visceral connection. And it's very important to us that we sustain this program. And in order to do that, they need to have that connection. And from the professional development program, they then implement their course, and we're there with them the entire time. Now, when you say teacher capacity, there's certainly the professional development part of our program, which is very intensive. But beyond that, teachers have their own agenda for joining such a program. They are after tenure. The buy-in and their motivation for getting involved in a program like this is really something we have to kind of sell. So These skills that they're learning, blended learning, collaborative learning, global virtual team building, interdisciplinary learning, intercultural learning, all of these buzzwords that are now trending in education, they learn it within COIL. And they don't need to be siloed in their departments, in their academic departments, to kind of do this work. And we encourage them to build throughout their campuses, which creates more interest, more support, which bolsters their buy-in throughout the program. In addition to that, teacher tenure is always something that has interest for academics. And having something like this in their portfolio is certainly eye-opening. As Elliot mentioned earlier, corporations, in addition to academic institutions, are really trying to expand in this area. And so their interest really comes from there. And then the students' interest comes from their interest, and institutional interest comes from the success of the program.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I want to turn real quick to Ehab. Ehab, can you hear me okay? Great. I've got a question for you real quick. So oftentimes when we talk about when education in the Middle East is often discussed, we often have a discussion about a skills gap. And I would like to hear from you a little bit about the impact that your program has had on students in Jordan and the students here in the United States. Could you talk a little bit about addressing that skills gap? Thanks so much, Ehab. One of the things Ehab brought up over and over was community impact. So, Michael, I want to kind of turn to you a little bit. You're at Berkeley, obviously, an eventful few weeks at Berkeley.
Yes.
But I'd really like to turn a little bit more to the program you guys have formed, the project-based learning program you have with the Berkeley Public Health School. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and the community impact you foresee with that?
So we have a suite of different programs. One of them is the Language Partners Program, which sort of supplements Arabic and Kurdish language classes, giving students at Berkeley a chance to practice dialects and giving students in the MENA region a chance to practice their English-speaking skills. In addition to that, we also have a series of virtual exchange classes. We did one on gender and Islam with Al Ahlam University, which was a sort of straightforward, synchronous classroom-to-classroom exchange. And this semester, we're doing an exchange that's asynchronous with 3 different cohorts on public health and conflict in the Middle East. And so it really has centered a lot around the Syrian refugee crisis. And so the 3 different cohorts that we have is we have students at UC Berkeley who are mostly public health students, also some engineering, development type students. We have a group of public health professionals from all over the Arab world, folks who are working in hospitals in Jordan, at the WHO in Gaza, all different types of capacities as public health professionals. And then we have a cohort who are recently graduated medical students in Iraq, mostly in northern Iraq, and they're working in internally displaced persons camps. And so it's obviously a really sort of diverse group of students and participants, and each of which brings their own sort of needs and knowledge and skills to the class. And so we tried to design the class in a way that would be beneficial to everyone and would sort of draw on everyone's knowledge and experience. So the way we did it is we started out first with a totally online, asynchronous, basically primer on public health and conflict, particularly in the Middle East. So that folks at UC Berkeley who knew all about public health but didn't know much about the region, or who knew, who are master's students in public health and didn't know anything about refugee health, would be able to get something from it. And then also the medical students in Iraq who were, doctors, but working in a public health capacity and having no real public health training would be able to sort of get that basic public health knowledge. And at the end of those 6 weeks, everyone was sort of on the same page, had the same similar vocabulary, and were able to talk about public health and conflict in a way where they would understand each other. And then the second half of the program was group projects, in which they identified a pressing issue. Maybe it be something that they're working on themselves, something that's of interest to them that popped up in the first half of the class, and then all work together to create basically a grant proposal. The idea was that they were forming a new nonprofit organization and a new NGO, and that this final project would be the grant proposal to start it. And the grant proposals are due on Friday, and I'm really excited to see what they come up with. And it's going to be reviewed by a team of public health experts, because that's not my field. And the idea is hopefully that this will be the template for some sort of real actionable work that they'll be able to do. Whether they'll be able to actually take this group project and use it as a grant proposal to a potential funder. We've identified a few potential funders that they can sort of connect with afterwards, or just give them sort of those grant writing and other sort of 21st century exchange skills. In terms of community building, I think that the idea of the ripple effect really sort of resonated. But also just building communities within these different cohorts and between the different cohorts. We have a student who is a public health student at UC Berkeley, has never worked abroad, and has connected with a group through members of her group with who are working at the WHO in Gaza, and she's going to go there next year to sort of continue her work after graduating. So there's all sorts of different connections that are happening, and that's really what it's all about.
Quick follow-up question for
Yeah.
you. So you mentioned again that student who had never been abroad, that this was perhaps her first entryway. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic for a student who maybe has not been abroad, whether it's parents are in the way, or there's no room in the curriculum, or there's a financial barrier. Can you talk a little bit about how you all have used virtual to spark that interest and continued global engagement for students?
Well, there's certainly a wide reservoir of interest, and I think it's just sort of taking that step, because it's a big leap to go from, as someone who studied abroad himself, to go from being a college student in the United States in particular, and then going to especially somewhere like Palestine. But the virtual exchange is kind of that intermediary step, I think, for students like that, where you see the real value in front of you, and you also make those connections, and it becomes a little bit less daunting when you have a contact who's working on the ground at the WHO in Gaza. It's a lot easier to then say, okay, I'm going to go do this work here.
Good. Good. Alison, I want to follow up on you, and Lisa, we'll get to you in just a quick second. So you talked a little bit about teachers having different motivations for engaging in global exchange. One of the barriers that sometimes we see is obviously in terms of the finances of this, or different barriers coming from the principal's office or from the superintendent's office. Can you talk a little bit about navigating that? Sometimes that's a barrier, and how do teachers navigate getting a principal on board or a superintendent?
Well, we mostly deal with teachers in higher education, and their barriers are administrative, as you mentioned, and getting administrators on board is easier than you think, especially for something like this. SUNY, I don't know if you're familiar with SUNY, but we have a system of schools all operating within the system to achieve specific goals. And one of these goals is global learning for all. It's almost in the mission statement for every SUNY institution in the state of New York. So for a teacher to kind of go through COIL and go through Collaborative Online International Learning, which is what COIL stands for, to go through the process and then to see an administrator, bring them into their classroom and show them what is happening, it basically gets them on board. It's hard to convince an administrator that something that's this cost effective and student effective and learning effective and capacity building effective and community effective. It's hard for them to say no at that point. Funding is a different story, and the various aspects of support that one faculty would need in order to be successful in this program is also a different story. In our professional development program, one of the modules is to build a team on your campus that is a support team. We encourage that each faculty member have at least 4 to 5 people, somebody in technology who can help them should that fail, which it does occasionally. It needs to be troubleshooted often. Somebody in their department who can supply, academic support, help them adjust their course, adjust their curriculum, adjust their outline, should that be needed. Because sometimes a wrench is thrown in the very middle of the program, and their professor partner says, oh, we can't talk about that subject, it's not allowed. And so we need to redesign this part of our course. And so having that support within their department is also necessary. And having administrators, obviously, is important. We like them to come into the room. We like them to be involved. Somebody in international programs office, somebody working with the provost, with the dean, with the president of the university, any of these aspects. And once they have somebody in, they spread the word. So other people want to join. Other people want to get on board. Funding, because of the nature of what we do and the fact that it is cost effective, low cost. There is cost, but it's low cost. It increases administrative buy-in and interest as well, because we are all working on a state budget, so we have to operate as such. Now, in the MENA region, getting administrators on board is a different story. It's a different animal. And usually when an administrator comes into the classroom and they see what is happening, there's certainly a lot of interest. They see how it benefits their students. But making the case for why it will better their school, increase enrollment, increase interest in certain departments that have very low interest levels, it has to be sold to them. They have to be convinced. So each faculty member and the students kind of make the case for COIL for us. However, we do have COIL coordinators on each of our campus that are our main point of contact. And that person is usually somebody who's incredibly passionate about what we're doing and already has so much buy-in that they're able to go around and sell it to others. So having that on-campus support network is necessary. Getting people out of their silos, and I use this word very often because it's very much what it is in higher education. The Department of Physics rarely, if ever, coordinates with the Department of Languages. It just doesn't happen. So when the departments themselves have to kind of coordinate because the faculty member in the physics department is collaborating with a faculty who's in French, and they kind of need some ideas. So they go over to that department and they explain what they're doing, and then all of a sudden, there's this aha moment amongst faculty. It happens with the students, it happens with the faculty, and it happens with the administrators. And, you know, making the case for what we're doing isn't necessarily one of our biggest challenges because it is very attractive. Sustaining it and helping it maintain that level of passion and innovativeness is different.
Lisa, I want to come back to you with one thing. One of the, I think the really rich things about your program is the partnership that you all have with this museum, and I kind of want to drill into this idea of partnerships a little bit more. Tell me a little bit about how you've potentially worked with this museum to really formulate this and solidify your partnership, but also other entities around Chicago, perhaps the mayor's office, some of the universities. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the museum doesn't exist yet. We're creating the museum.
The online museum.
The online museum, yes. That is that is the project, is to create the museum. And it came about for a number of reasons having to do with other things going on in Morocco, in Chicago. The particular exhibit that we're working on is a dinosaur exhibit, Spinosaurus, which is a really, really important paleontological discovery in the Sahara of Morocco. And it was unveiled down the street here at National Geographic about 3 years ago. We had been working with Casablanca already in the capacity of Chicago Sister Cities around exhibitions, science education, cultural tourism, preserving natural heritage. A lot of fossils are just fleeing Morocco. And so the opportunity to use the virtual exchange project as a way to hit a lot of those buttons was kind of how we came around to this idea of trialing a lot of these ideas through a digital means. And also working with young kids, both to educate them, young kids, high school kids, but young to me, to get their ideas about a lot of these things and how they want to talk about them and what's interesting to them about them, which is part of the idea of having them be the co-creators of the museum. In terms of administration and partnerships, which I think is what you're getting at, right? I would say contrary to what, maybe not contrary, but for us, the most important people to get on board have been the teachers. And that they are absolutely key to the success of our programs because I've worked with a lot of educational exchanges at the high school level. And if you don't have a teacher who is going to just take this and run with it and go the extra mile and all of that, then it doesn't matter who the administrator is. Administrative support is really important, no question. I would agree that the administrative support in the MENA region, we work only with Morocco, but has a set of challenges that we did not face in this country at all. And it has to do with all of the layers of bureaucracy around who says what's going to happen in what school, and if you're in this region and your school's in that region, you got to work with that director. And so there's a lot of different levels to negotiate. And convincing them of the value of this program is At this point, when we have something in place, I think it will be a different kind of argument than, well, what's my school going to get, and what am I going to get out of it, and who's going to get credit for it? So, I mean, it's a little bit cynical, but that's kind of what we've been working with. But bottom line is the teachers are absolutely key. And so what we build into our program is a lot of ways of supporting the teachers so that they will stay with us through an entire year. And that support comes in the form of a facilitator who walks into the classroom every week, who knows the curriculum inside and out. The teacher does not have to master that. In the case of Chicago, small stipends to compensate them for time out of class, which is just standard practice in Chicago. We did a physical exchange between the teachers. At the beginning of the program, Casablanca teachers came to Chicago, and then midway through, we sent the Chicago teachers to Casablanca. And that was huge because they have an understanding then of the systems they're dealing with, the students, the challenges that are different in each side, but that and it allows them to make a very personal relationship with their partner teacher that continues to motivate them to, go that extra yard. So.
Good. Well, I want to open up the floor to questions from the audience. I think we've got a few microphones floating around. If there's any questions. There's one right there.
Thank you so much for great conversations. I'm Sarah Shirzad. I'm from Eurasia Foundation. I just wanted to know what wanted to learn about your experience with languages. I know that the core language for many of the exchange programs are English. In our case, what we see is that using a local language like Farsi for the program we do is it's very motivating, inspiring, and create a lot of empathy. I give you an example. We are working on this digital game program, which, I'm sorry, I don't know. We are working on this digital game program, which is bringing youth from both countries, Iran and US, together. And whenever we use some very small words in Farsi, people love it because they say, oh, all digital games we saw, they only use Farsi when it's a bad guy talking about something related to terrorism or whenever they're creating troubles. So wanted to know your experience with using local languages and how it influenced impact, if any. Thanks.
You want to start?
Sure. Well, we're going to do a breakout session about
on
language
languages.
learning. But in terms of we use English in our sort of classroom type exchanges, in part because most of the public health students don't know Arabic, and also in part because in the global public health world, English is a pretty standard medium of exchange. In terms of the language exchanges, it's, I think, incredibly empowering, I guess is the word, or enlightening or excellent for the students in the MENA region to sort of see value in the dialect, because that's not something that often is sort of ascribed value. And so to say, hey, there's people in the United States who want to learn Kurmanji Kurdish, or there's people in the United States who want to learn how to speak Jordanian Arabic. I think that the students have really responded to that, and the fact that they then get to learn spoken English, California dialect, is also a sort of added bonus for everyone. But I think that that's not exactly addressing your question.
Sure.
to just kind of follow up on what Ihab has said before, it's very student-driven. We don't dictate to the students or even to the faculty that they must have their course in English. We actually don't specify any language. We don't specify platform. We ask them to do what is comfortable for them. And English is a second or third language in almost every country in the MENA region. And almost all of the academic institutions, even Cairo University, which is a state institution, their classes are in English. There's very little Arabic within higher education outside of rural areas. And even there, the illiteracy rate is staggeringly high. So when you have a student who's having an exchange and they say, well, I have this great piece of literature by, let's say, Naguib Mahfouz, for example, and he tells this story about the war and everything that has happened around Sadat and Nasser. And I want to share it with you guys in Arabic. So here you go. And then the student themselves, they are unable to read it in its original Arabic anyway. So there is an assumption, I want to say, that's being made that we are saying, let's have English language acquisition. But there is very much a drive to have this second and third and even fourth language acquisition within these exchanges. And that is up to the students to generate. We want them to take ownership, as Elliot said, not only of the exchange, but of their language, of their culture. Many of them are rediscovering things about themselves and their own culture and their own identity in these processes on both sides.
There's a question over on the side.
Thank you very much. My name is Kamyar Alai. I'm from Global Institute for Health and Human Rights from SUNY at Albany. I think she raised a very important question because now we have an initiative for 523 medical students who are internally displaced inside Syria. And most of them, they can't speak English. Initially, we wanted to recruit Arabic-speaking co-instructors, but even those co-instructors, they couldn't communicate because Syria is the only Arabic-speaking country that they have their own medical terminology, means they don't use English. Initially, we recruited doctors from Iraq. I think this is very important because those who knows English, they can have access to global education easily. But as at the beginning remark mentioned, we are looking at the most affected who are in need. And I think we need to emphasize that we have to use language not only is good for them, but it's essential for them. So at the same time, we deliver online intensive language program. Through online intensive language program, we engage our students who they don't speak English, they don't speak Arabic, but through English, they develop the communication and they learn Arabic at the same time. Means at the end of each session, they learn some words in Arabic. That shows empathy, that this is mutual beneficial. So I think this will be initial to address the language barrier as well. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Questions? Great. I think we've got some questions on the side. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Neil Piper, and I'm with the Presidential Precinct in Virginia. And I'd first just love to thank you for taking time to talk to us today and share your experience. I'd be interested in learning how your organization, what you've learned through this partnership that's helped you better achieve your mission and achieve your goals as your organizations.
It's a great question. Well, Neil, as we kind of explain what we have done, it's important to note that we're working in two very different cultural regions with very different bureaucracies and very different institutions, very differently structured institutions. And I like to provide an anecdote to answer your question because I think this is one of those moments for me where I learned something that I hadn't known before. And there was a student who, within the exchange, basically said to the teacher, I cannot communicate on Facebook. I can't do it. I can't ask questions to my professor. This is a student from Lebanon. For me to ask a question to my professor is disrespectful of my professor. And it's disrespectful of their knowledge. They are teaching me, and I'm in this course to learn from them. They are experts in their field. I know nothing. So for me to ask a question to this professor it's not common practice. The teacher in the US who had the very informal kind of relationship with her students, she was like, question me all the time. She said, talk to me, question the course, question what I'm giving you, question the resources that I'm giving you, question everything that you have, question everything. And so she had noticed that even though many of the students in Lebanon were getting very high scores on their written material, in the discussion and interaction forum on Facebook, they were receiving very low marks. And so one of the things we learned that educational culture is an even bigger factor than intercultural culture, at least in what we're doing here. How education is translated, education itself, and how relationships and dynamics between students and teachers, students and students, students and the other. I mean, all of these dynamics are very important to address. And this is something that we had in our very first cohort. So she actually reached out to the student individually, and she said, I want to thank you, first of all, for bringing this to my attention, because I had noticed you get A's on all of your written work, but you are completely absent in all of the discussions. And I wanted to know if it was the platform itself, if it was the tool that we were using, or if it was something else. I had no idea that culturally it's inappropriate, at least in your mind, to question your professor. And so for that student, they were able to kind of communicate with this professor one-on-one in the message group, but they still, throughout the program, said that they would not question their professor. And she didn't try to change that dynamic. She said, that's the way it is. We're going to embrace that that is the way that it is. We're going to celebrate that that's the way that it is, and we're going to try to communicate to our students that not every place is like here, and not every power dynamic and not every educational institution, not every exchange, not every learning experience is like the one that we have, where we're told to critically question everything. So that's at least an anecdote that somewhat answers your question. And it's something that I learned because having gone to the American University in Cairo, there it's somewhat of a liberal atmosphere, and you can question your teachers. And having taught in Egypt, I always encourage my students to do this, not knowing that in the back of my mind that were they in Cairo University and were they with another professor, that they would have acted completely differently. I would not have had that experience as an American. So
We've got about 2 minutes, so let's wrap it up real quick.
Sorry.
I'd love to hear from both of you guys.
Just a related issue to educational culture is the educational system. And working with public schools, public high schools in Chicago, or anywhere, frankly, there are so many policies and regulations and goals and standards and tests and all of these kind of obligations in place that teachers have to achieve and teach to. And so bringing in a new program, you don't want to bring in some whole new thing they got to shoehorn in, and how are they going to have time to do that on top of everything, but in a way that integrates into their existing obligations. And the teachers have been really, really helpful in figuring out how to do that. So here we give them a somewhat generic curriculum, not completely, but how the language teachers use science to teach language, which maybe they've never done before because they just, never occurred to them. How the science teacher uses the project to incorporate cultural and global aspects of science, which is how science is often done now. How language is used in multiple ways to try and accomplish all of these things together. And the teachers are the ones who are figuring out how they can kind of fine tune these things to what they're trying to accomplish in their own classrooms. And so having to be very aware of the fact that they have their own set of needs and issues that we have to be completely respectful of and help support them with our program and make it that flexible that can happen.
Just really quickly, one thing that I have learned is just that there's really an incredible demand for virtual exchange, whether it be a language exchange, whether it be public health, whether it be the social entrepreneurship class that we're doing next semester. People really want to do this, both in the MENA region and here, and that's, a great lesson to learn.
Thank you, Michael. If you guys would please join me in applauding the audience. I'm sure the panelists will be around if you all have any questions, but I just want to make sure we stay on track. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Let's go.
Thank you, Ron.
I will say just a quick, can I turn the mic on? Turn the mic on. Just a quick housekeeping note. We've got several students here as part of the NDI delegation that Elliot had referenced earlier. I'd encourage you guys during some of the breaks to chat with some of these students. They've engaged in the program and are pretty sharp, very impressive. So I'd encourage you to grab them during the breaks.
Make sure everybody's liked them.
Mine seemed like a good fit because I do. Sure. Yeah. Maybe I'll put it on this side. I wanted to go to a small school, so I have some friends that do Yeah, I want to, like, I want
graduated from a great university and if you're not going through something like teaching directly or one of our programs, I have things about and they've heard of teacher work and they're like, hey, teacher work is great. And then they say, I don't actually feel like right now like if they want to teach America, they would say something like, I don't feel like teaching America's job fair is as it used to be. And I was like, that is completely the wrong way to think about it. You can't think of someone, I mean, we're in a new age of jobs open where people are jobs with the age of HR knowledge like a lot of people are now bringing America as a place where they build leaders and transfer technology in other sectors outside of teaching. So I mean, the question is like, I'm okay if they frame it that way. And like just be intentional about what you're trying to achieve. And there are people that will see the system, but regardless, really what we're trying to look at is how do we correct the lack of fallout of these highly motivated and really talented individuals who have started to teach and have these it. It doesn't matter if they leave and go back, but that ebb and flow is continuous throughout their But I just wanted to say thank you for that because that is so important. My passion is actually when you can build a pipeline of high quality teachers who have great technical skills, you can build a pipeline of things like virtual exchange where they will leverage technologies into every was a I think the other thing that's fascinating, I don't know if you guys have heard of Skype in the classroom, but it's much more K-12. It's much more collection where teachers from all around the world, maybe it's a geography lesson, they'll do a Skype session with another classroom in the area, and they'll learn about, what is like, how do you make people guess? Like, they show them a picture outside and say, guess what country you're in. And like, the students will then be teaching each other about their geography. Just wanted to say that.
If, ladies and gentlemen, if you can please take your seats. We're getting started with the next panel. All, if you can kindly take your seats, we're getting started. We're just getting started with our next panel. If you can please take your seats. Henry, I think you should just. Yeah.
Can you all hear me okay? Am I on?
Soon. It'll be kind of meta because we'll probably be able to.
Oh yeah, I'm going to try not to look over there.
Yeah.
I'm super self-conscious.
Can you all hear me okay? In the audience, can you hear me okay? Checking my microphone. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Where's our groups.
Thank you for being here with us this morning. My name is Henry Shepard. I'm Assistant Director of the Stevens Initiative, and we're so pleased to be joined by the traveling group from National Democratic Institute this morning. To talk a little bit about their program, we have Sarah Welsh, Senior Program Officer, and I'd like to start off by asking Sarah, before we turn it over to our traveling participants, to tell us a little bit about their program. So thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for having us. So our program is called the Civic Tech Leadership Program. It's at civictechleaders.org if people are interested. And it all began as a MOOC, a massive open online course. So we had an existing partnership with the Stanford University Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law to develop this open online course on technology for accountability. So the hypothesis there was that if you bring civic activists and technologists together on the same platform and get them collaborating on projects, that could be a really powerful potential for social change. And in some ways, that in itself was a virtual exchange idea, and we never thought of it that way. But we were trying to bridge these two cultures, people in technology, people in civic activism, who might be intimidated by the other's domain, but could really benefit from that exchange. So when the Stevens Initiative opportunity came along, we had a quick huddle. We already had the course developed in English, and we thought, okay, we had always wanted to do more than just a MOOC, to do more than just online content. We really wanted to engage people, get them working on projects. And we didn't have funding for that. We had developed this course on a very shoestring budget. So we decided what we would design. We would take people from this open online course, try to identify the people who were most engaged, most passionate about this, and pull them into a mentorship track. So we'll put them in cross-cultural teams. We'll have those teams collaborate on creating a video pitch. So this is a pretty standard thing in the startup world. You have an idea, but you need to develop into a really short, compelling pitch. So we thought we're going to coach them through that process, and then we'll select the very best pitches, and we'll bring those teams to the United States for a study mission. So that's what we did. We had over 3,000 registrants in a bilingual Technology for Accountability course. Of those over 3,000, a few hundred were really active. A few hundred applied for the special mentorship track. That was our virtual exchange. We had 200 people in that, and now we're so pleased that we have 15 of them here today.
We're really lucky to be joined on stage by Stephen Douglas Wright and Walid Ben Ali. And I'd like to give them a moment to introduce themselves and tell us where they're coming from and what they do when they're not part of this program. So, Walid, can I turn it over to you first?
Hello, everyone. So, I am Walid Ben Ali from Tunisia. I study business informatics, and I have 4 years of experience in the non-profit sector. So, I worked with ISEC and the Student Union on educational reform and youth development.
My name is Stephen Douglas Wright. I'm an actor, theater director, and playwright from Michigan. Originally from Troy, but then moved to Grand Rapids. Going to Aquinas College, I'll graduate soon with a degree in theater, philosophy, and political science. I also work with people with developmental and cognitive disabilities, teaching life skills. The project that we worked on for this is called Better Vote, and it's an online platform where you can view proposed policies and sources of fundings by candidates in the MENA region, and then assess objectively those proposed policies and sources of funding.
And Walid, can you tell me a little bit about your project?
So our project is it's a mobile app helping immigrant populations in the US to file police reports on domestic violence and obtain information about resources and help from local communities.
And Walid, why did you get involved in the program in the first place?
Actually, I thought it was an interesting way to be introduced to the civic tech sphere. So.
And Stephen, for you, why did you get involved?
I wanted to work with people from different places. So being from Michigan, there wasn't much of an opportunity. Most of my opportunities were just accidents or happenstance. So my girlfriend had studied abroad a few times, and so when people from France would move to Michigan, some of them would travel in my circles, and then I became friends with them. Or I serve on the staff of American Model United Nations. So a lot of the people on the staff come from countries other than the US. but I haven't had the opportunity to go abroad besides Canada, which when you're from Metro Detroit is just across the river. So, so I was looking, I know that working internationally is something that I want to do with my life. So this seemed like a great bridge to be able to do that.
You work in theater, so I'm really curious to know, how do you see this benefiting you in the future? What skills or what do you hope to take away from a program like this?
So there's a lot. There's first problem solving. That's something that I think is both common between theater and civic technology. So with writing and producing a play, you might think, how am I going to do this? So you need to find a space, you need to find actors, you need to make sure that they understand their lines, you need to hit certain milestones, and you need to make sure that you're holding people accountable. You're also working with a lot of different people in a very vulnerable sphere because they're using their emotions, sometimes their personal experiences. Likewise, in civic technology, you're doing the same thing. You're working with people from different cultures, different assumptions that they're making, and you're trying to hit certain milestones, and you're trying to come to a common goal. So that, I think, is the first thing. And then also being able to refine the questions that will lead you to problem solving, which when you're dealing with people from a different culture and trying to work toward a common goal, whether in theater or civic technology or anywhere, learning how to ask the right questions is the best way to navigate that complexity. So this has been a great opportunity to do that.
The fact that you're both here today means that you were part of teams that were very successful at coming up with an idea, working together, and pitching it to the world through a video. But I know that you both said that collaborating in these online virtual exchange groups was still challenging. So how did you overcome those challenges? Wale, can I start with you?
So first, the challenges was that we first had to handle the time zone difference and our very busy schedules. And so our mentors helped us, and then our will to communicate with each other. So, for example, my team, who's made with Flora and Clara, U.S. citizens, already looked for a name for our app, which is Saadni, and they have a great way to pronounce it. It's cute. So I think it's our will to communicate and to solve social issues that helped us.
Stephen, how did your team deal with the challenge? What were the challenges you faced and how did you overcome them?
So I think one of them was having not dealt extensively with people from different cultures, not knowing what might be sensitive or what might be complex. So then trying to ask the simplest questions and navigate that so that we can begin to figure out what project to do and how to do it. Also, there was a little bit of a language barrier, but not extensively. So I speak English, I speak a little bit of German, but between all three of our members, Ahmed Galal, Yunus Sarar, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and myself, we were speaking English, Arabic, and French. So I felt a little bit out of the loop in that I wasn't able to go beyond speaking in English. So it required refining my questions in a way that you can communicate simply, respectfully, and effectively while actually working toward what you need to do.
I'd like to know what each of you would say to someone who's trying to design a virtual exchange program. Wala, what would your advice be to someone trying to set up a virtual exchange program?
Okay, first they have to target young people and include as much people as possible. And also what helped with this program is that we were able to get help from our mentors and facilitators, and we were provided with best case practices, which were encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I think focusing on the hard-to-reach people. So I'm a first-generation college student, so if a lot of things had gone differently, I wouldn't be here right now. It was a lot of circumstances that just happened to meet up. I happened to know someone who posted about this, and then I applied for it, I went through the program, and now I'm here, and I'm very thankful for that. But I come from an area where a lot of people don't have access to those opportunities. So figuring out how to get there. I think that you could do that by reaching out to schools, reaching out to superintendents, reaching out to libraries. I think also focusing on problem solving. So when you're having these kind of projects, there are always going to be problems. And it seems intuitive that you would just take them on one by one and ask, how will I do this? So for example, our project, how will we collect the data? How will we make sure that it's reviewed objectively? Where will we start? How will we navigate the political climate to make sure that it is amenable to what we want to do? But to a lot of people, that doesn't come naturally. It's something that needs to be taught and needs to be acquired. I also think focusing on fun, because if you're reaching out to the youth, then you need to be able to engage them. So I'm particularly excited about art and things like theater and video games that I know that I've heard about people working on with virtual exchanges. So focusing on fun.
Sarah, I'm sure you have several ideas for what you would advise someone to do if they were designing a new program.
I do, but I'll try to stick to one sort of top line message, which is you really do have to think about what technological tools you're going to use. But I think that's the last thing that you should think about after you've worked out all the other fundamentals. So, in my mind, the fundamentals of people-to-people exchange don't change just because you're online. There's a lot of basic questions like, who are these people? Why will they be interested in this program? What's the value proposition? If they give of their time and energy, what do they get back? How are they going to hear about it? What do you expect them to do after the exchange? All these things about the people. And if you can answer all those questions clearly, then it's pretty obvious what tech you should or should not use. And it sounds really obvious in hindsight, but I say that because it was really easy to view the tech as a constraint. So many people told me that this program was crazy and it would never work. And we said, well, we're going to try to implement it anyway. It was extremely ambitious. And people said, how is somebody in Morocco or Yemen going to access this? The government may be blocking websites. The power may go out. There's all these issues. And that was usually from Americans saying that, honestly. Because we have a lot of people in our organization from MENA, and they said, oh, people will figure it out. If they are incentivized to come into your program, they will figure out the tech. All those issues exist all the time, and people are on the internet. A lot of them are on the internet because they figured out ways around those things. And what they emphasized for us, and were constantly pushing us on, was the language. It's not the tech that's the constraint, it's the language. And if you can't figure out how to make the experience accessible and valuable and easy for somebody who only speaks Arabic, in our case that was our primary language, then it doesn't matter how much effort you put into great technology and great materials, because they're not going to be able to access it.
We'd love to turn it over to the audience for your questions, and I'll do my best to call on people in the order that I'm seeing questions. We have one in the front over here. Please wait for the microphone, and if you could introduce yourself when the mic gets to you. Thank you. Thanks.
Is that good? All right. I'm Peg Peoples, and I'm from Bard College. And I have a question for Sarah. One of the things that certainly Robert and you guys are a great example, but I'm wondering in terms of motivation and creating incentives, with a program like this, that is drawing on so many, how did you articulate sort of how this program would create pathways for students?
Yeah. It's a great question, and that was our biggest challenge, because we had this very complicated Rube Goldberg kind of structure of a MOOC and then a virtual exchange and then an in-person exchange. Our biggest challenge was communicating to people what we wanted them to do in order to get into the program, what we wanted them to do once they were in the program, and then what was the value proposition. And so I think what we've seen, we haven't finished analyzing the data. What we've seen initially is that Americans tend to be more motivated by fun or challenge, that they just thought, oh, this is kind of neat. Civic tech, making a video, that would be kind of fun, and with people from other cultures. And the people from the Middle East that responded to our surveys were more likely to say that they wanted to come to the United States on the study mission. And so that was sort of intentionally built into the program as an incentive. We were asking a lot of people in this virtual exchange, and we knew that it was going to take a lot of time. And so the potential payoff for a lot of people was the ability to come on this study mission.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I think we see one here.
Hi, My name is Jill Levenfeld, and I work for an organization called Kids for Peace, and I live in Jerusalem. And we work with Palestinians, Israelis, and Americans on a program that's actually based here in Washington called the Global Institute. So my question is, and what we're working on also, are these lofty goals of civic tech, of youth engagement, and hoping to raise the voices of young leaders to make change by looking at government and political structures in hopes of building young peace builders. So, Wala, the question is to you. I know you said it sounds so, it sounds ridiculous, but the time zone is a huge problem for us. And I know you threw it out, but I would love to know how you've worked through this, because we sit in Jerusalem and the West Bank, and we have our youth here all across America from west to east coast. And it's very, very difficult to find a single hour that works in young people's lives. So I'd be very curious how maybe you could help us with this challenge.
Okay, so there's a difference of 5 hours between Tunisia and the United States, and actually we would stay up late or go out like if we're in a conference, we would just go out and meet, and we try to meet more than 2 times a week. So it was challenging, but again, it's our will that helped us do it. We had to stop everything we did and just go and meet and talk about our project. So I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
I think I saw a hand from this side of the room before. Was there someone who wanted to ask a question? Allison?
Thanks. You kind of touched upon this already, in that it was your will that kind of brought you forward as your motivation, as your buy-in. And what was yours? I'm sure at some point you had to stay up late or you had to get up early to kind of engage with your team. Mm-hmm. And I understand that education is very important here in the U.S. and it's a great buy-in for students who feel like they're obligated because of their program. Mm-hmm. But was there other motivations for you beyond your education?
Yeah. I think part of it is I just like things that are challenging, and I like things that are project-based, that have an end. So that's part of what attracts me to theater, is that you put on a show, and sometimes it may run for a long time, but sometimes it may just run for a weekend or two. And you work with a group of people, you get something done, you're very proud of it, you hold it as being wonderful, and you can stay in contact with those people, and then you move on. So this was exactly in line with how I like to work. Getting to know people from other cultures and the experience of working with them to see what challenges there would be going forward. So at first it was almost like, okay, this is a safe way to test drive working with people rather than a resource intensive going out to another country and then taking all the time to figure that out. So I think that those two things are part of it. I just really like challenges. I like things that have an end. Like you remember them well and they're wonderful, but they have an end. And yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Allison. We have time for one more question, and I see a hand over here.
Jamie Leibowitz, East Carolina University, and this is for Sarah. You mentioned that the biggest imperative you were receiving from your partners was not the technology but the language. So how did you overcome that to allow greater access?
Yeah, so we used a lot of the resources from the Stevens Initiative on translation and interpretation. That was a big part of our budget. My colleague Bashir, who's here and is the heart and soul of the program, is a native Arabic speaker. And so we relied very heavily on him throughout this too. He was communicating with participants in Arabic through email and through calls whenever that needed to happen. And you know, we had a team of people that were native Arabic speakers within NDI to sort of user test for us, to go onto the platform and say, if I don't know any English, I'm not going to know where to go on this web page, and I'm not going to know how to register. So it was a little bit of that, and then we just constantly had them testing it. So, you know, for example, we had videos in the course, and they watched it and said, it's fine to have Arabic subtitles, but it's distracting to try to read the subtitles and watch the video, so you need to record a voiceover in Arabic. So, we got our interns and project assistants that speak Arabic to record the voiceovers. So it's just a constant process of having somebody test it from the point of view of an Arabic speaker. And I think it's still a challenge. Most of the people here are fluent in English, and so I think it was still, despite our best efforts, it's still much easier to engage in English because it's designed by English-speaking people, and most of the platforms that we're using are English only.
And how about that, for that small group, for the groups that you guys were in, was language an issue there?
Yeah, absolutely, and these guys can speak to that. We did make interpretation available for people who needed it, so they could book an interpreter for their groups, but not that many people took advantage of it, to be honest, because again, it's a coordination and logistical challenge to book an interpreter at the same time, and you have to think far enough in advance that you set all that up. So it's absolutely a challenge.
Do you all have anything to add on the question of language within your small groups?
Yeah, actually, I just want to add that our app targets immigrants that are not proficient in English. So we're trying to give a translation tool to people to try and report, file police reports of domestic violence, because we really think that language barrier has been hasn't been helping in the process of reporting domestic violence.
So it sounds like the commitment to including people who speak other languages has actually suffused the whole program and carried over into the work of the project, which is great to hear. Before we break, I just want to ask you to please stay in the room before we go to the next session. And please join me in thanking the participants from National Democratic Institute.
If you guys can keep your seats clear for 1 second. Okay.
How much time? 1 minute?
Folks, just a reminder, we will be getting started immediately, so if you could remain seated, that would be great. Thank you.
Anytime. Great. Okay.
I'll wait for that. Just make sure that that's running. All right. Great. That work right? You want to chat? Okay. Good? Is it time to go?
Yeah, he said, yeah. Yeah.
Where should I be aiming it?
Over there.
Okay. So you can just let it know. Okay. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Don't make me use my teacher voice. I'm David Devlin Foltz. I'm the Vice President of Impact Assessment at the Aspen Institute, and I'm very happy to be moderating this panel, which will talk about how we know it's working. How can we capture the impact of virtual exchange programs like the Stevens Initiative? And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to be here with a team from RTI, which I still think of as Research Triangle Institute, but popularly known by its initials, like so many things in Washington, D.C. We only need an acronym. But RTI undertook the really challenging task, I say this as an evaluator, the really challenging task of trying to capture the impact of this initiative. And we'll be hearing today about early results, early findings from RTI's evaluation project, but something that lays the groundwork for the work that they'll be doing over the duration of the project. And I think it's a great opportunity for the many professionals in this field who are in the room to contribute their own thoughts about how they think about assessment and what else this project might capture. And as the team from RTI will explain, this is a developmental evaluation, which is a term of art, which means from an evaluator's standpoint, we're making up the evaluation as the project goes along. But I say that respectfully because that is the typical practice and a route that my team here at the Aspen Institute has occasion to pursue with some of our clients, where the project really is new, where it really is developing, where we don't know exactly how it's going to proceed from the outset. And so the evaluation needs to evolve as the project itself evolves. But that's enough for me. We're going to hear from the experts at RTI in just a moment. So I'm going to turn first to David Silver, who's going to give us an overview of RTI as an organization. And then just to give you the order of battle here, next up will be Jen Laird, sitting here immediately to my left, who will talk about the methodological approach that RTI is taking, followed by Jalen El-Rahman, who will talk about an overview of the semi-annual report that RTI has just released a couple of months ago. And finally, we'll come back to Jen, who's going to talk about the product of some very, very, very recent site visits that she and colleagues undertook to Morocco to see some of the projects in the field. So I'll turn it over to David now to give us the overview of RTI.
Thank you. So as David said, I'll give a brief overview of our approach to the work, the methods in the study. And Jen and Jalen will talk about initial findings and some more detail about the methodology. I'll also give a brief introduction to the organization, RTI, and to our center, or actually two groups at RTI that are involved in this work. I can't advance the slide. So that is a photo of our headquarters in North Carolina. We're a fairly enormous mission-based nonprofit. We've got almost 5,000 employees, and we have 11 offices in the US and 11 internationally. And we work in many, many more places than that. The organization, one of the sort of unique things about the organization, I think, is just the breadth. We have, the mission is essentially to using sort of the whole continuum of research to practice to make an impact, a positive impact on the world. Our center, which I'll describe in more detail, has a breadth of evaluation and research methods, and I think what's unique about that is we can sort of bring the tools to the problem rather than try to fit the research problem or evaluation problem into our specific areas of expertise. And because we're in an organization of 5,000, we can draw from statisticians, and there are engineers, there are educators and health people and international development people. So we really have a wealth of expertise to draw from. Go to the next slide. So this is the key players in the team that is doing this evaluation. A couple who couldn't be here, unfortunately. Sonia Moldovan comes from our International Development Group. Her expertise is in measurement and evaluation and learning. Christina has actually just gotten back from Morocco, so she couldn't be here. She's got young children at home, and she thought that was more important. Jen, on the other hand, was also in Morocco.
I have teenagers, they can wait.
So Jen is the project director on the team. Christina is a senior researcher, and Jalen is a junior researcher on the team. I think that's everyone. And I am the director of our Center for Evaluation and the Study of Educational Equity, of which everyone except Sonia is a part. So with that, I think I'll get a little bit into our approach to the work. Can we advance?
Next slide.
All right. So as David was saying, I don't need to say too much more about developmental evaluation, except that if it were only about learning, designing the evaluation as we go, that would apply to all of our evaluations. What's special about developmental evaluation is that it is focused on sort of nascent programs often, where the primary interest is not in a summative assessment of whether things are working or not, or even what works and what doesn't definitively, but what do we need to know to improve the work? And developmental evaluation has a big focus on helping stakeholders use data, collect the data that's necessary sometimes to set the stage for an impact evaluation down the line. But most importantly, to make sense of the data and to think collaboratively, for us to think collaboratively with the awardees, for instance, to understand what's important to make the work better, as well as to document what's going particularly well and where the pain points are. A key part of really all of the evaluation we do is focus on engaging stakeholders. I think you can't do a good evaluation without getting plenty of input from the stakeholders, and in this case, as many of you know, we have a group of stakeholders that are actively involved in, quarterly meetings?
Bi-monthly and now quarterly, yeah.
To give feedback on the evaluation, to ask questions, and to help guide our work, do things like review surveys. In general, I think evaluators probably don't pay enough attention to the extent to which the subjects of the evaluation have critical information to share with us to help us understand the work. So those evaluation groups help with that. We also understand or understood early on in this process that many or most of you have internal evaluations, and we're not one of those evaluation groups that feels that impartiality is so important that we don't want information that may be biased by people doing the work. Rather, we take impartiality seriously, but we also recognize that there's a lot of work already going into understanding the programs, that we want to take advantage of the evaluation people who have been hired by awardees or within the awardee organizations. So that's an important component of our evaluation. Finally, the idea of culturally competent evaluation is something that we take seriously, and it's not, by that I don't mean that we expect to be experts in the cultures of North Africa and the Middle East. We rather recognize how important it is to be sensitive to cultural differences, and not just culture in the traditional sense, but cultures within cultures. Educational culture, as you heard earlier. I think that was a great example of why it's important to pay attention to cultural issues. If we're trying to study engagement, it may mean something very different in a different culture, the implications for measurement may be very different. If we had used a traditional measure of engagement that we often use in a school in the U.S., in that context, I think it would appear that people were disengaged when in fact they were sort of working within the norms of their culture. There are myriad of ways. I don't think even within the U.S. context, that could be an issue comparing a school in D.C. with private school in Bethesda. So what's important about culturally competent evaluation is that we part of the process is to try to recognize our blind spots. It's part of why we engage stakeholders, and we sort of start with the assumption that we need to be aware, both in the way we design the evaluation, design surveys, and the way we interpret the results of the evaluation, since there probably is no perfect measure for many of the constructs that we're trying to track. Can we go to the next slide? So just wanted to talk about some of our research questions. We'll flash up most or almost all of the important ones that are part of this evaluation, and I'll just briefly describe a few of them. Where sort of the overarching goal is to look at the strengths and weaknesses of the work to date, with an eye again to helping to inform all of the awardees about what people's experience has been with success and what the struggles have been. One of the key parts of this evaluation is to look at promising practices, and we're interested in the attributes and designs that are most promising. And that, I think it's important to differentiate that from looking at sort of which programs are high performing or low performing. That's not part of our charge, and it's not something we're interested in, but we are interested in things that happen in many places that sort of are promising practices that could be adopted by others, or common struggles that people have that we can help inform solutions to. Can we go to the next slide? Part of the evaluation is also about communication of these practices. So that's an important question, is how are you all disseminating and communicating information, and how we can as well. The evaluation, I think, aligns pretty well with what Elliot spoke about earlier. In many ways, one is that which is the way it should be. We are interested in getting a handle on what the reach of the work has been so far, as well as what the outlook looks like for expanding. And finally, I would just say that this is not it's really not an impact evaluation, although we're very concerned about setting the stage for impact, for understanding in a qualitative sense what's going well and less well. But we're also, in the way we're setting up our data collection, we're working with awardees to try to put in place the building blocks for potentially a more rigorous evaluation of impact. And that means working with you all to create the best measures, to understand the important outcomes, and to both understand what you're doing that we can learn from, and to help refine the approach to measurement that you have, so that when the time comes, when things are more mature in the virtual exchange world, you'll have what you need, hopefully, to really demonstrate a strong level of evidence.
Great. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit more about our components and methods. First, we developed a monitoring and evaluation plan where we drafted research questions, identified potential indicators and data methods to address those questions. And we did that by reading a lot of materials shared by the Aspen Institute, both of their strategy documents and logic models, and materials from the awardees. And we had a one-day workshop with the Aspen Institute staff, the Stevens Initiative staff, and representatives from the two main funding groups, the State Department and Bezos Family Foundation, to really refine our plans. And soon after that, we established the evaluation working group. This includes a representative from each of the 10 awardees, as well as the two largest funders. And as David mentioned, we met initially bi-monthly, and now we're moving to a quarterly process. And one of the things we wanted to do was try to identify a common set of survey items. We knew that each of the awardees were doing some data collection themselves. Many were already doing surveys of participants, and in some cases, teachers and facilitators. We didn't want to ask for another separate set of surveys. We wanted to leverage those activities, and we wanted to try to identify a small set of common items that would be appropriate for all or most of the programs. So we did that by looking at what some of the existing programs have already been asking, and a few items bubbled up and that have some research bases behind them. So those common items are being implemented this spring. We're going to show you some results from this fall, and at that point, some of those items were used by a few programs, but they weren't yet used by almost all of the programs. So the data collection are surveys from participants and sometimes teachers and facilitators. We just got through an amazing set of site visits, which I'll share some initial results for in a moment. We're using also a method called Most Significant Change Stories, and this is an opportunity for the programs themselves to collect some qualitative data in a structured format, and I think twice a year, we're asking that programs submit 2 significant change stories, and that becomes a qualitative basis of data for us as well. And then we'll do some additional key informant interviews. When we go on site, we try to observe the exchange, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. We have a focus group or group interviews, or sometimes one-on-one interviews with participants. We interview the facilitator, our teacher, and other stakeholders involved in that program. In the fall, we want to broaden our interviews. We think there are some people who aren't directly involved in some of these programs that will have important perspectives about the field in general, where it's gone in the last few years, and so we'll do those in the fall. Next slide, please. To give you a sense of our timeline, this is a 2-year evaluation. We're just now finishing the first year. And so again, we started with a monitoring and evaluation plan. We're engaging the evaluation stakeholders almost throughout the life of the project. When it comes to doing our final report, we'll ask for their feedback on presentation and different messaging that'll be important for different stakeholders. The survey data collection, some programs were implementing in the fall, most programs were implementing in the fall actually, and did surveys, although at that point we didn't have our current survey items identified. So there wasn't that piece, but in the spring we are going to have that, so we'll have those data in the summer. And then I've mentioned site visits. We'll do some more in the fall. We are producing semi-annual reports. We have a draft of one that we've shared with the Stevens Initiative in March, and after this meeting, we will share it with all the awardees as well, and then we'll have a final report at the end of the 2 years.
Great, thank you. So as Jen mentioned, we are charged with developing several reports in our role as evaluators, and just this past March, we submitted a draft of our second semi-annual report to the Stevens Initiative, which basically offered a summary of our evaluation activities to date, focusing chiefly on fall 2016 implementation of grant recipient programs. And that would be actually the first time that all 10 of the grantees have implemented their program since we've been involved as evaluators. So that allowed us to develop a little more comprehensive overview in this particular report. As Jen mentioned, our team plans to submit a final version of this report fairly soon with some updated data from awardees, as well as some refinement to the report based on feedback from the Stevens Initiative. Once we do finalize that report, we do hope to share with awardees in the room, though all program names will be anonymized. So programs might be able to see how their unique data relates to larger trends among all 10 of the awardees, but program names will not be associated with any data points. So that is our plan. So awardees in the audience can expect to receive a version of that report in the foreseeable future. So a little bit about what is included in the report. Our team was able to articulate some preliminary observations and trends based on several sources of data. First, we looked at data on program attributes and reach, looking particularly at participant demographics. And we had 7 out of our 10 awardees submit information about their participants, and that included location, by state in the US or by country in the MENA region. Some awardees included information about gender, some included information about school age, and there were a couple of awardees who also included information if participants came from traditionally marginalized populations, refugee youth, homeless youth, youth in Title I schools in the US, and students in rural areas. Second, we looked at survey data that the awardees collected as part of their own internal evaluations. We had 7 out of our 10 awardees submit information about their fall 2016 implementation based on their internal evaluations. And most of those surveys were conducted among participants, but there was some information about surveys completed by educators as well, which was interesting to look at. Again, as David and Jen mentioned, most of these surveys were developed and administered by awardees themselves, so they were designed in variable ways. They might have been collecting similar participant information or common outputs and outcomes, but because they were so variable, it made it very difficult for us to be able to aggregate the data and present it in that way. But what we were able to do is create common categories of outputs and outcomes and discuss some general trends in the data from there. So we'll talk about that in a few. As Jen mentioned, we do collect most significant change stories from awardees, which again are an opportunity for awardees to share powerful anecdotes about impact. RTI also hosted several reflection sessions with representatives from each of the awardees, which is an opportunity for awardees to come together and unpack common challenges, discuss some promising practices, and engage with one another as colleagues in the field of virtual exchange. And then we also took a look and incorporated data from quarterly reports that awardees submitted. So yeah, those were really the data sources that we used to provide the meat to the report that was really structured around central research questions that we articulated in the monitoring evaluation plan. The relevant questions that we focused on in this particular report included reach and scope. It included questions around, to what extent Stevens is really achieving the goals that they're trying to achieve in terms of outcomes and outputs, and then successes, challenges, lessons learned from folks on the ground. So can we keep going? So let's dig into some of the program details and give you all a sense of Stevens, who Stevens is supporting, who the awardees are serving, and how they're serving them. So in terms of age level, we had awardees tell us participants range from as young as middle school to as old as college level students. Length of program varied quite a bit, with some programs lasting certainly less than a couple of months, some lasting as long as full academic years. The amount of hours that awardees or participants engage with the program and the curriculum within those timeframes also varied quite a bit. With an interesting finding, actually, that students based in the MENA region actually spent more hours engaged in program curriculum than their counterparts in the US. So that's something interesting. All awardees had asynchronous components to their exchange experience, and a couple also had some synchronous elements, though those look different depending on capacity of the program and context. Many of the programs were embedded in a class or course context, but there were some programs that were also separate and distinct from school settings, including video game platforms. And then content focus varied quite a bit as well. As we've heard already, there were some programs that were focusing on discussions around political issues, gender and Islam, public health. There were programs that were more collaborative in nature, producing a project, a science-based project. And then there was some more straightforward, like language exchanges. So there was quite a variability there. So there were certainly some similarities across programs, but each of the programs definitely had their very unique flavor, which really showcased just how many forms productive virtual exchange can take. And I think that makes for a very dynamic session and forum today as you all engage with each other. Can we proceed to the next? All right, so we have some charts and graphs for you all to sort of visualize who and where people are in each of these programs. So this is a map of the US. And we can see that there's a fair distribution across the states. There's significant representation from states like New York, Virginia, Kentucky, and even right here in DC. Let's keep moving. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the MENA region as well. We had a significant amount of students in Morocco, where I think all of our awardees actually have site locations. Tunis, Jordan. Next slide, please. Of those who submitted information about age, it's pretty clear that the vast majority of participants fall within the high school category. Next slide, thank you. Again, of those who submitted information about gender, it seems like there's a fair balance and distribution between genders across locations. Next slide. Great, so across the various programs, we saw that students generally reported a high satisfaction with their experience in the programs. One interesting finding that we sort of want to elevate in this space is that students in the MENA region tended to rate their experiences slightly higher than students in the US, and that was consistent across programs. So we've wrestled with some of the potential reasons why that may be and come up with a few theories, but we're definitely interested in hearing from folks in the room as well about what their interpretation of that data is. So it certainly can be that MENA-based participants are just having more positive experiences than people in the US. That could be that they are engaging with the program for more time than US-based students. So it could just be that they are having a better time with the programs. It could be that there are like social, political, or societal factors intersecting in a way that make students based in the MENA region more apt to provide positive or non-critical responses in a written platform. Or it could be that students in the MENA region are also just deriving satisfaction from the program, from components of the program that are tangential to the exchange itself, such as having more consistent and sustained access to technology in a classroom setting. So those are things to keep in mind. But as I said, we're definitely interested to hear how folks in the room interpret findings like these, because you guys are definitely closer to the programs on the ground, and we value your insights. So next slide. One of the overarching goals of the Stevens Initiative is to increase cross-cultural empathy and understanding and feeling of commonality between groups of people. So different programs measure this in different ways, but one of the survey instruments that 4 of the awardees used was the self-other overlap measure that was developed by Dr. Emile Bruneau out of MIT. It is a measure that is designed to be implemented pre and post program to measure how students progress in feelings of commonality towards another group. And research has shown that high scores on this particular measure is correlated with feelings of compassion, trust, pro-social behavior, and more cooperative exchange. So we had 4 of our awardees use this measure, and there were slight increases from pre and post program on this particular measure, as well as other measures that programs chose to use to measure cross-cultural empathy and commonality understanding. What we do want people to be aware of, though this seems promising, is that it's really difficult to know how to interpret results like these and know what the real-world impacts are and what the magnitude of these results are because of a couple of things. One is that we don't have a control group to compare this to, and 2, that our N's, our sample sizes in each of the programs is fairly small. So it's really difficult for us to deduce that these types of findings are conclusive at this point in the evaluation. Next slide, please. Great. Programs also assessed acquisition of different skills. Those included cross-cultural communication, collaboration, leadership, digital literacy, problem solving, knowledge of global and local issues, and language improvement. Most youth reported gains in the skills assessed. Again, we do want folks to be aware that there's always a threat of self-reporting bias, so it's difficult to rely heavily on student surveys. For example, something that we noticed was many of the programs asked students to rate themselves on various skills pre and post program. And gains in this case were not very clear because students tended to rate themselves very high pre-program on all of these skills, which might mean that they're very skilled at it, but it could mean that they inflated their ratings a bit because of limited exposure to those skills, right? Like you might think that you're skilled at cross-cultural communication, but if you've had limited exposure, opportunity to actually engage in cross-cultural communication, to actually hone that skill, you might not know what it means to be good at it. You don't know what you don't know, right? So that's a consideration. There were also programs that just did the post surveys where students did report that they did see themselves improving quite a bit. This something that we just want people to keep in mind, that could be a result of students just having a positive attitude towards the program itself. So yeah, those are just things to keep in mind. Next slide, please. And then finally, additional qualitative data elevated some of the challenges and promising practices and responses. We had most awardees highlight struggles with marketing and messaging around programs, and then retention and recruitment in general. Many reported that a lack of the in-person exchange components as part of the general virtual exchange programs was sort of a barrier to participation. That seemed like a very appealing factor for a lot of people. Teacher engagement and retention also posed a challenge. It seemed that people didn't feel like teachers or professors are getting a very clear reward from participating in the program. There were folks who mentioned that providing certificates or micro-credentials to teacher might be a potential solution for that. Many reported that curriculum flexibility is super important, especially in programs where you're implementing the virtual exchange in a classroom, a pre-existing classroom context. Because in classrooms, you'll often get unexpected disruptions and schedules will shift, and if you have a very rigid curriculum, it can be very easily thrown off. Unsurprisingly, technology and its many challenges were frequently cited as one of the main hurdles that programs had to jump. That included a lot. Dropped internet connectivity, problems with video conference technology, procuring necessary hardware to implement the exchanges. There was also the issue of finding the right platform to conduct the exchange so that one group of students weren't at a disadvantage because of familiarity with that platform. And then security, of course, it was important for a lot of people to have a highly secure platform to ensure privacy and safety for the students. So yeah, that is a little bit of an overview of what that report entailed. We were able to glean these insights from the data sources that I had mentioned, but I think one of the most valuable reservoirs of data that we're currently filling and have filled so far is informational interviews with participants on the ground and focus groups. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen, who will talk a little bit about site visits.
Great. So I am just back from 2 amazing weeks in Morocco. Our colleague Christina Stearns was with me, and Catherine Borgen, if she's here, from the State Department was with us. Thank Catherine. And there we were able to visit 6 of the 10 awardee programs. And again, we were able to observe the exchange, talk with students, talk with educators, other stakeholders. And we also have been doing US visits. So far, we have visited 4 of 10 awardee programs. We're going to do site visits again in the fall. I don't think we're going to be able to get to the MENA region again, unfortunately, but we will do more US site visits. So I want to lift up a couple very initial themes. I do want to acknowledge that we went to 1 MENA country and that the cultural and political context clearly would be different across other MENA countries. The US and Morocco have had a relatively long-standing, stable, and relatively positive political relationships, and that is not the case with all of the US and other MENA countries. So I want to acknowledge that what we gleaned from the ground in Morocco would certainly not be identical from what we would glean in the ground in other MENA countries. So first I'll tell you what we heard from students. We talked with a lot of them. They were very welcoming and generous with their time. When we asked what they feel they gained, and what they cited first was the cultural understanding and opportunities, appreciation for both sharing their own culture as well as learning more deeply about the US culture or other countries that they were engaged in with a same age peer and in a sort of personal way. They absolutely appreciated that. For the Morocco students, a really important outcome for them was to be able to practice their English orally and written, written and through posting, but orally and verbally. And they really gained a lot of confidence through that and felt very motivated to keep studying English. They particularly, we heard this strongly in Morocco, not so much in the US, but they feel like they gained a lot of confidence about expressing their ideas. They have less opportunities to do that in the Moroccan educational system compared to the US system, is what we've been learning. And they appreciated it and felt that they were really gaining those skills. Of course, there were different focus areas for each program. So depending on what they were studying, they did report that they were learning more about science or about using technology for civic life. And then what came across very strongly among the MENA was opportunities to work in teams and collaboration. Again, their education system does not do as much of that. I have teenagers in the American system, and they're at this point tired of teamwork and collaboration. But for the Moroccan students, this was unique, and they really appreciated that opportunity and recognized those as important skills. Teachers added a few additional gains that the students didn't quite articulate for themselves, but that I believe, because we observed some of it, was that although many of them have access to computers, much more limited than most US students, there often is a set of computers in a computer lab. They're older computers, they're not always linked to the internet, but they have that, and many of them do have phones and tablets, not all of them that we visited. But they haven't used them for things like research. And so the teachers were very excited for them to be able to learn those skills. Besides, they go on social networks, but they haven't deeply used the internet for research. So that was an important skill that the teachers saw them gaining. And other 21st century skills, inquiry, taking more initiative, again, inquiry-based practices in Moroccan schools are not as common. And so the teachers were very excited to have the opportunities and some curriculum developed for them to do that with the students, and the students responded very positively to that. The teachers, many of them cited that they were growing professionally. Some of the programs resulted in a certificate, which is meaningful to them and in their educational system. And they also, again, they would like to build in more inquiry-based approaches, but the national curriculum is very tight. And although they're undergoing reforms, just like probably every country is trying to undergo educational reforms, it's taking time to take hold. And so to have something, a curriculum provided for them that they could learn from was beneficial to them as educators. So we did not hear any student from the US that we've done site visits in or in Morocco who are done with exchanges. They would, many or all of it, I don't think I heard anyone say they don't want to do an in-person exchange. They are hungry for more opportunities, both in person and virtual. When we were describing who we were and that we were coming to study or to learn from different programs, when many of them didn't know that there were other virtual exchange programs, and so at the end of the focus group, they'd come up to us and say, so what other programs? And we'd pull up the Stevens Initiative website and say, well, you might want to check out this. And so they would love more opportunities. Almost all of the programs had a synchronous exchange, and we know those are challenging with time difference and technology, and they're so important. Without a doubt, that when we ask what the essential ingredients are, what's the most important piece, teachers and the students mentioned having an opportunity to talk at the same time with a video camera was critical. So for those of you who are doing that, thank you. I know it's challenging. For the few that maybe aren't, I want to suggest it's worth the blood, sweat, and tears to try to fit that in at least once and early on. It is important, we heard, to allow for one-on-one and small group interactions as opposed to assuming that just kind of bolting two classrooms together and having group discussions. The students need to get to know each other and sort of build trust and feel comfortable asking questions. And so building that in is really important. We heard among the US students where we've been able to do site visits before, we've heard an increase in other cultures and an increase in travel. The Moroccan youth in general already had that curiosity. But they became more confident in wanting to explore more opportunities for in-person and virtual exchanges. I think we're on our last slide. So yes, and this was brought up earlier, that there certainly were technology challenges, but we were amazed it did not stop anybody. They were entrepreneurial, they were flexible, they were gonna solve this one way or another. Oftentimes it was, okay, the video conference isn't working on, so the teachers got on WhatsApp, which apparently everybody's using WhatsApp, except me, I'm not sure that is, but they would then, they were very flexible about solving these problems. That was really impressive. And somebody mentioned another common challenge was, particularly in Morocco, was the bureaucracy in multiple levels. And again, folks were very creative and they know best how to work around those bureaucracies. So one really interesting anecdote I thought was they were having trouble within one region getting approval, and finally somebody who's involved in the project who's very well known called the embassy in the US, the Moroccan embassy in US, to say, hey, we've got this really important project, we're not getting approvals, and that then made things happen in his region, so that was smart. Okay.
Great. So technical hacking, political hacking, bureaucratic hacking, all excellent skills that you can impart to Americans as well, I think. Well, good. Well, thank you very much. Before we open it to you for questions, and I think especially comments going to the question posed actually by the RTI colleagues here, the question about why is it in particular, why do you think that MENA students might have expressed higher levels of satisfaction overall than the Americans? But let's hold that out there for you all to think about for a second. But I was intrigued by your comments about cultural competence, cultural responsiveness, and just say a little bit more about how you do that. How do you ensure that the evaluation is culturally responsive and appropriate across these very diverse contexts in which you're working?
Yeah, so I absolutely don't think we've perfected it or cracked the nut in this project or ever, but I think, as David mentioned, being aware of our blind spots and being curious and engaging and requesting that stakeholders who have more of that cultural experience is critical. So, for example, one way when we were coming into Morocco, we requested a few phone calls ahead of time with folks who have worked in Morocco or are in Morocco to say, what would be a comfortable way for us to introduce ourselves. We understand that students aren't used to something like a focus group, so what should we do to make them very comfortable? So one thing we did was, we didn't want to use the term, we're assessing you or evaluating you, and what we really said
is, evaluators never want to say that.
Right. We're here to learn from you, and so you're the experts, and then when we would ask what are the challenges, and they would say, oh, no, it's perfect. We'd say, come on, please, we know nothing's perfect. And so we would just be a little more patient and encouraging. And we also made sure that we had a Moroccan translator with us. And he has experience with the Stevens Initiative, so he has the content information. And while many of the students were anxious to use English, we wanted them to be able to express themselves as deeply as possible. So often it would move into Arabic, and that worked much better. We do think there's much more to be done. In particular, this study, needs to be located within a broader research agenda and field, and what we think would really be great is to involve some researchers from the MENA region so that it's truly cross-cultural in that sense, that there's some US researchers and also researchers in MENA who are working together to understand virtual exchanges.
Something that I would love to add, and I think it's implied, but I just want to make it explicit, is two things that we're very conscious of when we talk about intentionality around cultural competence. Is that one, culture is not static or monolithic. Right? We don't assume that everyone in the MENA region shares a common culture. There's nuance there, and culture plays a different role in the data depending on those contexts, similar in the US, right? That's one thing. So we know that there's a lot of nuance, and that's why we're very intentional about engaging stakeholders and hearing from folks on the ground. The other thing is that we're also very aware that our own cultural lens impacts how we approach the evaluation. It impacts what questions we ask, how we structure everything, and we're in a constant state of self-interrogation and examination of how we're doing things, and that's another reason why, again, we're very intentional about talking to folks who are actually doing the heavy lifting.
Right. Good. And out of this, since you, obviously early days, first semi-annual report, but are there early findings that from which you can derive recommendations either for Stevens or for the field more broadly, or is that just premature?
Yeah, I think we have some that we're very comfortable sharing, and a couple of them I'd mentioned, so I'll just quickly tag them off. Make sure that there are opportunities early for individual or small group connections, not just sort of bolting two classes together, because it builds trust and comfort with exchanging ideas and cultural information. Build in synchronous exchanges, and we suggest that this collaborative, in particular, think about some warm handoff opportunities, because there are a number of programs serving post-secondary and young adults, and there could be, we know that this group wants more and more opportunities, so thinking about ways of some warm handoffs. We also suggest, and there are a couple groups that are doing this, think about youth leadership opportunities in your programs. For example, some of the programs that are, I'm thinking of the Chicago Sister Cities, which is a full year program. There are some really awesome engaged students who I think could be be involved as maybe a youth advisory group for the next round of participants. They have wonderful ideas about new content areas, and I think getting that opportunities for youth leadership and youth voice in program design would be awesome. And then we have some suggestions around evaluation that we'll be tackling with the evaluation learning group.
Right, good. Well, good. We can open it to the floor, and I see hands already are rising. So do please wait for the mic. I think we have one in the back, and I saw one here, here, here. Okay, let me try to come back to you more or less in order. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Billy Clark, and I'm the artistic director of Culture Hub, which is based at La Mama Experimental Theater in New York. And we founded in 2009, and the primary focus of our work is artistic collaboration over distance, both for education but also for art making, actually making pieces that are distributed and utilizing the internet as a means for that distribution. And so I'm interested in the synchronous aspect in particular, which is very challenging. And through our practice, we've become frustrated with the tools that were there, so much so that we've started developing our own open source tool. And so I wonder, in your evaluation process, if the existent tools that people are using, if those are being rigorously evaluated, and if there's a way that those lessons learned or things like that could be shared, if that's part of your plan. I saw that it was to a certain extent, but I'm curious more about that.
Yeah, so we're not ourselves doing usability testing, but we're certainly asking about that. And through one of the reflection sections that came up about, so there is already a small table that we've prepared that describe the different platforms that people are using, and it seems like in some countries a platform works better than others, so I'd be happy to share that with you. And then other programs have a particular platform that works for their project because they're sharing digital artifacts. So some have taken platforms that existed for distance collaboration and modified them for this purpose. But I don't think that there's identified sort of one single platform that works, in all these different areas. So we've had groups say we found that Google Hangout was better than Skype, or vice versa, depending on which countries they're working with.
While the mic passes up here to the very front, if you don't mind. We've done a series of webinars with colleagues in East and West Africa, and a woman in Dakar said, "The internet here is moody." Yes.
Hi. One of the goals of the Stevens Initiative, and certainly of the evaluation
I'm
team.
sorry, would you mind identifying yourself?
Allison Church, SUNY Coyle. One of the goals is to measure sustainability and ways in which things are sustained. Now, as you can imagine, many of the awardees in the room certainly don't want their project to go away once the funding does. And so in what way are you measuring sustainability over time? For example, in Coyle, fall 2017, or fall 2016, Professor X does a Coyle program. It reaches X number of students. Those X number of students then go on to their other courses and other subjects the next year. Professor X wants to continue coiling on their campus. How are you measuring that? And then how are you measuring the ripple effect that happens within the campus community and the community at large over a long period of time? Certainly, I'm sure that there are effects that are happening in the short term in the community. There certainly are with Coyle. But what are your objectives in staying connected with people and awardees after the program's over?
Yeah.
Great.
Good. So I can take a shot, and then others feel. Our study isn't long enough for us to be able to build in too much data collection beyond, but we certainly have asked about sustainability when we've been on site, how once the Stevens Initiative funding goes away, to what extent do you think you're going to be able to sustain these, and how, and what types of partnerships have you developed that you think, or what types of structures exist that you think will help you continue to do this work. And in Morocco, there is a group teachers of English language, and they've started something called English Circles, which essentially are clubs that teachers can facilitate, and they want to have some of these programs continue in those clubs. In terms of the ripple effects, we asked about that while we were on the ground, and asked students in particular, have you talked to your family about this? Do you talk to other friends? What have you said, and what's been their reaction? And we hear that maybe they're more talkative to their parents than American students. So they said, I tell my parents all the time, they're really excited for me. They're asking what I'm learning. They're encouraging me to keep doing this, and that within their school, folks are getting more and more interested, and they'll come peer when there's a video conference coming in and they want to be involved. So we certainly heard ripple effects in terms of interest. We asked a little bit on the ground about, but maybe we should think more clearly about asking programs quantitatively to help us think about this, about retention. So for teachers, how many, once they've done it once, what for one term, what proportion return back to do it another. And so I think that's an important perspective for us to think about, how to ask programs to help us think about that more deeply.
Hi, my name is Peter Sullivan, and there was a lot of great data. Thank you. My question is there, with the statistical process tools you use, is there a way to transfer that, to train the people on the ground to evaluate their own failures and successes for their given agendas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think now that we've had this first round of survey data, we will bring it back to the evaluation learning group. And that's really the venue we're using to be able to provide some level of technical assistance around evaluation. But that's really one representative from each awardee. So we haven't yet gotten to the point of thinking how to support them or encourage them to work with their partners to be able to develop those capabilities also. So that's an important point.
Great. I'm going to take one more question on this side, and then I'll turn to this side.
Thank you very much. Kamil Day from Global Institute for Health and Human Rights. Given the topic of the panel is evaluation, and this is the lesson we learned from the first year round, my question is, if I'm correct, is 6 out of 10 awardees are from Morocco. And given we talk about MENA, it's 23 countries. Was there any reason for that, or should we look at the diversity?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. The resources for the evaluation only involved one trip, and Stevens Initiative and we agreed, selected Morocco because that's where we could see the most number of programs. So we are collecting the survey data from all the programs, including in the different countries they are. And I think while we can't do another international trip, I think we could do some virtual site visits with some of the programs in other countries. That's not, we know that won't get nearly as rich of data.
So my point is about the policy of awarding for the next round, not for evaluation. My point is because, excuse me, so to make it clear, my point is 6 out of 10 is from Morocco, but we have 23 countries. Is there any policy for next round to have more diverse awardees from different countries? That was my question.
Good. I'm going to turn to Henry to respond to that question.
It's such an important question that I want to make sure we jump in from the Stevens Initiative.
Yes.
I think my microphone just back on. While we have 7 of our 10 awardees running programs in Morocco, many of those programs reach multiple countries. And so our programs collectively reach 19 countries across the region and 29 US states. So while Morocco is the most represented, it's by no means the majority of the programs. It's just that the majority of programs have some activities in Morocco. Again, there are programs across 19 countries across the region. And the data reflects much of that on the screen that you saw earlier. And there's more data to add for this current semester, which wasn't reflected in the data, as well as next semester. And spreading to more countries is certainly a high priority for future rounds of funding.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think we had a question right here. Is there a microphone handy for the woman in the second row? That woman.
Hi, Shari Tishman, a co-director of the Out of Eden Learn project at Harvard University. First, a note of appreciation because you're tackling a really complex problem space and your evaluation is really interestingly mixed and I think very rich. So it's really cool to see that. I'm going to go back to something you mentioned earlier, and I'm really interested in the relationship, and I realize this is a little bit premature, but I'm interested in the relationship between the dramatic stories and the surveys. I'm wondering if you are finding anything in the stories that you're collecting that can help people think about survey design, because as you pointed out, many, if not all of the projects here use surveys.
Yeah. That's an important point. We know, I think we have more to think about quickly before maybe the next fall of surveys. We do, there are opportunities in surveys to ask open-ended questions, and so that would be getting sort of more qualitative data from more people. It can be a bit overwhelming to know how to analyze that, so we're trying to both satisfy collecting some information from a wide group that can be quantified on some level, because a lot of stakeholders want to see some numbers. So we're trying to do that along with the more deeper dives through most significant change stories and the qualitative interviews. In terms of whether some of what we're hearing from some of that, I mean, folks are so articulate about how important and deep this experience has been, and helped and been meaningful for them in terms of reflecting on their own culture. I heard that more than I expected to hear. So I think, I'm not sure we have survey items related to that, so that might be something we want to think about.
I would just say absolutely, we will try to use the information we get from all of the qualitative work to inform recommendations about refinement of surveys. I think there are some things we've learned about the quality of the measures in some cases, like the lack of differentiation. If everyone is answering that they think highly of their experience from the beginning, or of their skills from the beginning, it's not really a good survey question. So we'll make recommendations about that. We'll make recommendations based on things that we think would be interesting to incorporate from our qualitative study.
All right, good. Yes, just keeping the mic on this side here.
I'm just curious. I'm Peg Peoples again. I'm from Bard College, and because I run a professional development institute and engage in a lot of education initiatives, I'm curious. One of the key things here is, in learning all these new skills, are you looking forward to, or have you already begun to think about how teachers and students are transferring these skills? Is there a level of transfer going on into other courses?
Yeah.
That seems really kind of key, and I'm wondering if you've already gotten at least survey information from that survey data.
Yes, other courses or other behaviors that would represent a carryover.
As a transfer of skills, I mean, that seems to be at the heart, of this is,
We did ask and hear some of that from the educators saying, I have, but now I'm more comfortable and I've used some of the technology, doing internet searches in some of my other classes with students. We asked students, has your behavior changed in any way, and can you describe that? And maybe we didn't ask it clearly, but it was hard for them to answer in a way. We did. Many of them would, by themselves, say, I now when I'm at home, I spend time doing internet research. They wouldn't call it research, but I look for things in the internet and I found things, as opposed to what I used to just do was get on Facebook. And so we heard that, but we had a hard time. I don't think we've yet figured out how to ask students about that.
Well, I am told we have a minute. We're going to take one more question right there. Sorry about that. Yeah.
We're happy to answer questions during the break.
Sure. Let's take this one.
Sorry. That was my mistake.
Sorry about that.
Sorry to steal the mic, but Jody Sanger with the Institute of International Education. But I'm actually asking this question on behalf of Solia program because I also facilitate with them. Going back to the deepness aspect that you mentioned, people liked being able to talk about these issues deeply. I feel like one of the things that I encounter with American students is they feel like they can't get to that deepness, perhaps because when they talk in like a really like high English, they're not understood in the session. And I feel like it's a frustration that I come up with a lot. And I wondered if in doing your evaluation between programs, if there was any control between when there was or was not an interpreter, I guess a translator available, and whether or not that changed.
Yeah.
Not just the satisfaction of the Arabic speakers, but also the English speakers in the group.
Yeah, that's a really important question, and maybe because we haven't done as many U.S. site visits, that hasn't bubbled up so clearly to us, but it makes sense. We can look to see whether we can ask programs to clarify whether their programs include a translator. And I know some of the platforms had, they were using Google Translate, and that was helpful for some of the students. So that sounds like a really important thing for us to consider.
That's a great question. Great. Good. Well, thank you. Thank you for, as a person in the evaluation field, I'm always delighted when actually people appear interested in evaluation. So thank you so much for your attention. Thanks for our panel. All right, good. I believe, where are we headed next, boss? Lunch.